Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 163. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Christy Pretzinger. As the owner and CEO of WG Content, Christy has established an industry-leading company that delivers superior content and strategy to healthcare brands nationwide. She intentionally focused on building the business based on kindness, and that approach has proven to be good for people and the bottom line. Over time, Christy discovered a true calling, to create a workplace that nurtures personal and professional growth and help other leaders do the same. She's a popular guest speaker for events and podcasts, always ready to guide audiences on how to grow leaders and build environments where people can thrive. Over time, Christy discovered her true calling, to create a workplace that nurtures personal and professional growth and help other leaders do the same. Christy's new book, Your Cultural Balance Sheet, Keys to Creating an Environment Where People Can Thrive, is due out January 2025. Christy, so glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Naftali. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely, and so am I. Okay, so bio has been read. Now tell us the real story. Who are you? How have you gotten here? We're very curious.
Yeah, the real story. It's never your bio, is it? Well, I started out many years ago as a freelance writer, and I did that for quite a while before I started building this company. And when I started building this, as anybody who's an entrepreneur knows, you just kind of start doing what's in front of you. You're doing all of the tasks. And I had no vision for what this was going to become. It was just, I had a child, I was married, I was the breadwinner, and I had to make money. But I will say that when I started building it, I did say to my accountant at the time that if I couldn't build a business based on kindness, I would go back to being a freelance writer. And as I just said, you kind of forget, it's like I had that intention, but that wasn't what I thought about every day. I was thinking about, the next project that we could get. So eventually, after probably a couple of years, as I mentioned, I'd been a freelance writer, so people knew me in my town, my city. And so a former client had come to me and said they needed a team of writers for a large project. That was a short turnaround time. We did that. It worked well. And I thought, oh, I'll bring teams of writers to big projects. And then fast forward about another 9 months to a year, and another former client worked at a hospital organization in a nearby town. And she was launching 3 hospital websites concurrently and was under the impression that most of the content had been created, but in fact, really nothing had been done. And I ended up within a few days having 35 writers on this project. And so we did that. It was a longer term project than the previous one. And it ended up, again, being successful. We learned a lot. And I then decided to bring teams of writers to hospitals and told myself the necessary lie that would be easy, and started doing it. And, you can't be a prophet in your own hometown. Nobody in my city would really talk to me. So I went north to Columbus, Ohio, and ended up starting a relationship with the Ohio State universities. This was probably about 2007, I think. And they are still a client to this day. So once we got them, they were pretty big. Then we started getting other ones in the region first. And then in 2011 is when I hired my first salesperson, who is still with us today. And once I did that, I was really able to get out of working in the day-to-day so much. I was able to begin working on the business instead of in the business. I mean, I was still building it actively, but not doing everything. And so then, fast forward to today, now we have about 30 employees. And we serve clients all over the country. And I think we work with everybody in our town too, which is kind of funny because they wouldn't talk to me at the beginning.
Mm. And your town is Cincinnati, is
Cincinnati, Ohio. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So what does it mean when you say you wanted to found or to run a company based on kindness? What does that mean? And practically, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it was
assuming you've achieved it.
I think we have.
Okay.
What's interesting to me is that somebody asked me once why kindness was my driver had I worked with for unkind people. And I'd never thought about it that way. And when I look back, I realized I did not work for unkind people, but the structures within which they worked did not foster kindness. And I now, in hindsight, of course, I can look back and say, oh, well, that makes so much sense that would have been in my experience, because the way our business is structured is to foster kindness. We don't really do performance improvement plans. Those are unkind. We approach people and invite them to be vulnerable if something has changed in their performance, and to say, what's happening here? Is there something we can help you with? That kind of thing. So we approach everything with kindness, which is not weakness. I always think that that's important, especially as a female leader, and other female leaders I talk to. A lot of times they're concerned that their kindness will be perceived as weakness.
Mhm.
I personally feel that kindness, clarity is kindness. Boundaries is kindness. So there are all sorts of things that maybe people wouldn't necessarily correlate with kindness that in fact are kind in the
Yeah.
work.
I'm just
Um,
looking at here. I'm just taking a sneak peek at my phone for a second because there's a book that I've been listening to called, I believe it's this one. Yes, Let's Talk. Make Effective Feedback Your Superpower by Therese Hudson. I don't know if you know the name, but in the
no.
book, a lot of what you're sharing, is what the author talks about, different ways by which to coach people, different ways by which to have those conversations. And that's kind of interesting because oftentimes we think that, like you said, performance reviews, there's a certain way to do them, right?
Right.
And I think part of what we're trying to do here, as we reflect on leadership and reflect on the needs of our employees, especially as they continue to change with each generation, is we try to iterate and say, well, what's working, what isn't? Is there a better way to do this? And you coming in from a perspective of kindness, of support, of inquiry. I know Simon Sinek talks about this a lot,
Mhm.
right? Instead of saying your numbers are down, you better get your act together, or your numbers are down and you're out, it's your numbers
Right.
are down and what's going on, right?
Hmm.
Is there something here that I don't know? And you kind of
Yeah.
peel back the layer a little bit, but you have to be able to, I think, to model that in order to be able to get it from your people. So I'm curious to know if you have something to share specifically, Christy, on that point. In terms of modeling vulnerability, discussing it, showing it, what is your approach, your company's approach to creating an opportunity for people to say being vulnerable is not, I'm not putting my life out on the line by saying it the way that I need to really say it for me to be honest here, and walk that fine line between accountability and coaching, growth, etc.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that question there, but I'll start with the vulnerability piece. Back in, before 2010, I would have gone to my grave saying that vulnerability was weakness. And in my experience as a human and the people that I've come across over my lifetime, that's pretty common for people. I always say that nobody gets out of childhood without bruises. And so we all have them, and then we want to cover them because we're trying to protect those bruises. So then 2010 happens. I'm listening to a lot of TED Talks, and I came across Brene Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability and shame. And I was gobsmacked by that. I mean, it was such a new concept to me. And I probably listened to it or watched it 10 or 15 times. And then, of course, that piqued my curiosity. So I started reading her books, reading different books, and really learning and coming to fully understand that you cannot get to courage without vulnerability. There's absolutely no innovation without vulnerability. So it's really key to so many things in a successful work environment, as well as in being a successful leader. So for me, the way that I demonstrate vulnerability or lead with vulnerability is I make it very clear that I don't have all the answers. And by the way, if I did, everybody else would be unnecessary. So I'm very clear that I don't have all the answers. And I feel like it's my responsibility to come up with the right questions. That's the kind of the inquiry point that you mentioned. And I know that in our organization, when the leader, and there's a leadership team, so when the leaders are open to being vulnerable to the people that work with them, that makes the other people feel that it's a safe space, that they can share things openly without some sort of retribution or judgment. And that has worked very well for us.
Mm. So I'm curious to know, is there anything just to drill it down a little bit further and make it even more, let's call it concrete or relevant? Is there a scenario that you can share, obviously not involving the specific details of the individual, but a scenario where you went through a process where a person was struggling in a particular way, could be you or one of your leadership team members, and through this methodology, we're able to see transformative results?
Gosh, I have to think about that. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so I'm certain that there are. What I think in my experience of this, what I say frequently, and I believe, is that I cast the vision for this environment and then the people have to live it out. So it's like leading a horse to water, but they have to drink. And so I will say something that I have observed over many years now is my COO, who's also a dear friend of mine. We actually study the Enneagram in this organization. It's a personality typing tool. There are many out there. The reason I was drawn to this one is because it's ostensibly simple because there's 9 types, but there's a lot more nuance to it than that. But it addresses your motivation as opposed to your behavior. So behaviors can look similar from different people, but why they behave that way is different. So with my COO, we have coaching. We had coaching with an Enneagram coach, as well as lunch and learns and things like that. And I really watched her over time really grab onto that, dig into it, really, really use it as a tool for self-awareness and personal development. And I have been absolutely so amazed and impressed by the growth that I've seen in her in terms of really, I mean, in the workplace for sure, she's brilliant at what she does, but even more so in her interactions with her family and being able to, like with her extended, with her mom and her sisters and things, and that she's been able through all of this self-awareness to have challenging conversations. You know, that is frequently something people just don't do. And she does it with grace and with a tremendous amount of self-awareness, and having worked on things that like the lower side of her personality. And she's really worked to hone that and be aware of it so that it isn't something that drives her behavior. And that's been really remarkable to watch. And again, she did the work. But I mean, I just led the horse to the water, you know, presented this, you know, personality typing tool, and she really dug into it.
Interesting. So there are a lot of companies that I talk to, and they're interested in making changes. They're interested in improving their employee skill sets or bringing professional development to their companies, but they're afraid. You know, they're afraid of the implications of it. They're afraid of people saying that they don't have the time for it and they feel so busy and all of that. Is there any advice you could offer that would be helpful for people who are thinking about it? Number one, why is it so critical? And number two, what would be a way by which to sell it, so to speak, in a manner that people understand that yes, you've got a lot going on, or you know, we've got some issues that we have to deal with, but it's all for the purpose of growth. It's all really for the purpose of, you know, a better future, rather than just sort of coming down on folks.
Yeah, I think you kind of addressed this a little bit at the beginning, that it is much easier to be a general as a leader than it is to be the kind of leader that I choose to be. It's much easier to give directions, to give deadlines, expect people to do it. Don't ask them what they think, just get it done. If you don't do it, you got a pip and you're out of here. That is so much easier. But for me, it doesn't really bring me joy, and it doesn't give meaning and purpose to my life. So for me, I look at really the benefit of all of this is also for me. I mean, certainly, let's be clear, you can run a business without caring one whit for the people that work for you and be very successful. So that's just not what we're talking about. But I also think that having the intention to really help people, like I actually do use the word love with my employees, because in English we have one word for love, but there's many different kinds. And one of the definitions of love is wishing the well-being for other people. And so I genuinely wish the well-being for my employees. And so with that in mind, everything that I do, I try and have that perspective. Now, I've talked to other, you know, owners, business owners and leaders and things. And if I tell them something that I've done, they're like, well, I don't have time for that. I'm like, okay, well, then that's fine, but don't pretend like you care about culture. Just don't. And that's okay. You don't have to. Nobody's telling you you have to care about culture. I am, and sharing my experience around it because it has enriched my life. And as a result, I've had the privilege of feeding into the lives of the people that work for my organization. And that has given my life meaning and purpose. So again, that's my path. Not everybody is going to go on this path, but for those who are interested in this path, I'm more than happy to share how it has worked for me.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So let me ask you a question that was, like, I guess you would say, relating to the underpinnings of your response, which is mission and purpose, right? So we talk about it. It's one of those terms or two of those terms that we throw around quite a bit. But at the same time, I think people struggle to figure out what that actually means. And so I'm curious to know, how did you arrive at your own sense of what your mission and purpose are? And what advice would you give to others to do their own exploration?
For me, even back when I first started as a freelance writer all those years ago, I realized at that time that I wanted to have life-work balance, and I use that intentionally as opposed to work life. I really did, and I noticed as a freelance writer when I first did it that it all bled into one thing. It was just the way you live your life. I think there's actually a book called "There's No Such Thing as Business Ethics" because it's just ethics, and I feel like that's the same kind of thing in my own experience of building a business. It's an extension of who you are as a human being. And so for me, we together as a team many years ago developed our mission as an organization, which is building relationships one word at a time, since we are a group of people who create content. And that actually speaks to me too, because relationships have always been of primary importance to me. I am just by my own nature, someone that's inquisitive and wants to get to know things about people. I'm not very good at small talk. I'm going to dive right in and we're going to talk about something deep. And I find that to be meaningful to me. So the fact that my organization's mission would directly align with mine is not surprising to me, and that the whole organization follows that mission.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of purpose, that kind of, for me, my personal purpose, it's kind of evolved over time, that it aligns deeply with the mission for me. And it really, in many ways, it's about reinventing the way people look at the world of work. We spend so much time working and with these people, probably oftentimes more time than you do with your family. So it's so important that that be an enriching, life-affirming place. And for me, the one thread that I find is common in all human beings, whether you're in work, family, friends, whatever, is that every single person needs to know that they matter. I mean, some of it ties deeply to self-worth, but really that they matter to someone else, that their thoughts, their feelings, their cares, all of their hopes and dreams matter to someone. And if you can connect at that level as a leader, then people know that even though sometimes work is hard, it's not always all sunshine and roses, right? Sometimes it's hard. But if you know that the people you work with genuinely care about you and genuinely come to a situation with the best of intentions, it just makes it so much more joyful. And that feeds into our values, which are we are empowered, curious, kind, and fun. And those values are very constant in our organization. We talk about them a lot. They are incorporated into our meetings, into our every other week newsletter, our internal newsletter. And people do use those values as kind of like a thread through the organization. And then all of our decisions can hang upon that thread.
Mm, yeah. I mean, there's a lot just in terms of how you arrived at those values and what companies can use to really unpack what their unique values are.
Yeah.
Tell us, Christy, about your book. What motivated you to write it? What's it about? And who's it for?
Okay, so I am part of an organization called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. And for anyone who's listening who hasn't heard of it, it is for business owners. And it is in, I think, 70 countries and about 20,000 members. And in the US, the requirement for belonging is that you be an owner of a business. So in other words, you can't be fired, and that you have $1 million in revenue. So I came across this business, this organization way too late. I wish I would have come across it when I first qualified. But in any case, it consists of a lot of different things, but the main thing is a peer group. And so it was called a forum. I have a forum that consisted of like 8 people, and they very successful business people. And I swear, I think I was in this group meeting monthly with them for almost a year before I even knew what their businesses were, because it was all about just the challenges and rewards of running a business as opposed to the tasks you performed or the product or service you supplied. So anyway, that's a long way of getting to the fact that I was having dinner with several of those my forum mates. And we were talking about exiting a business, which means you're looking at EBITDA and you're talking about balance sheet and multiples and all that kind of thing. And so I was listening to them and I just kind of was musing, and I said, of course I look at my balance sheet. It's important. I have a fiduciary responsibility, but it's almost like I look at my business through the lens of a cultural balance sheet. And so one of my peers looked at me and he goes, "Well, there's your book." And he'd been bugging me to write a book anyway. And so I was like, okay, you might be right. That could be a book. So I started trying to kind of unpack it. I let it drag around. It took way too long to do it because I do other things, get distracted. But as I was trying to figure out if that metaphor actually even worked, and came to the conclusion it's a little bit different than a financial balance sheet, obviously. The book is broken into 3 parts. Your cultural assets, your cultural liabilities, and your cultural equity, just like a balance sheet. But in the assets, obviously, people are an important asset. And then I go through several other things. The thing that revealed itself to me about the liabilities, cultural liabilities, is that if you choose to have an intention to repair that liability, it can actually become an asset. So I'll give you an example. For example, let's say that you discover that you're rigid. You are rigid as a leader, and therefore there's a lot of rigidity in your organization. A lot of this is the way we've always done it kind of thing, as opposed to really opening your mind. So obviously that can be a drawback. That can be a liability. But if you have an intention to address that rigidity, to develop more flexibility, and you pay attention to your intention, right? You have to actually pay attention to it. You can actually turn that rigidity into an openness and flexibility, which then in turn moves into your asset side. And so I didn't realize that was going to happen when I was doing it. I was like, well, isn't that interesting? And that, that can be true on a financial balance sheet as well, but it's particularly true in the cultural balance sheet. And then when it comes to cultural equity, what really happens here is much like Simon Sinek talks about a circle of safety. What happens here, the cultural equity is the culture itself that you have worked to create by paying attention to your assets, working on your liabilities, which results then in the equity, which is the culture itself.
Okay. Well, very excited to hear more about it. That really is very powerful. There's one thing though that you said that jumped out at me in particular. As an Orthodox Jew, so I pay a lot of attention as much as I can to the Torah and scriptures and whatnot. And whether it was a story of King David and the sins that he committed, it ultimately resulted in improvements and in greatness in a variety of ways. Within the ideas, we just celebrated the high holidays. So Yom Kippur is a Day of Atonement, and oftentimes to use a business example that I think is very relevant to a personal example as well, when we sin or when we fall, when we have moments of weakness, or even ongoing things that are, let's say, part of our nature, if we come to terms with it and we truly repent and we truly make an attempt to change, that liability often becomes, one of our greatest strengths because we had to work so hard to get there. It was not something that came naturally to us. And so you really own it. You really own it. And that ownership propels you spiritually, but it also propels you just in terms of your character. So I think it really ties in nicely to a lot of the themes that have been, I guess, top of mind for me. And certainly sounds like a lot of value in the book. Let me ask you one last question, Christy, before we wrap up this segment. And that is for a mistake, right? So that wasn't a question yet, but what is a mistake that you've made early on, perhaps, or maybe even more recently, that has ultimately set you up for greater success, something you've learned from that has helped you become the person and the leader that you are today?
I have made so many mistakes, Naftali, I can't even list them all, and I've been doing this a long time, so I have to always think of which ones, because when I coach younger businesses that, just more starting out at a lower revenue, I frequently say, let me share my mistakes with you so you can go break it in a brand new way. And so I've made many. I think one of the biggest ones that I think had a it seems smaller now in retrospect, but at the time it was big. It's been 12 years now. But I studied French in college. I was not a business person, never took an accounting class. I mean, I have an element of business acumen, but I'm not now I am with the understanding all the finance things, but way back when we were much smaller, I had an understanding, but I didn't know the difference between cash and accrual accounting. And that was very expensive for me because what happened is, as most people know, because they probably pay more attention than I did at the time, if you're on a cash basis, which is what we were at the time, then all of that cash, and if you're an S Corp, it flows through to the owner's W-2 form. So we collected a bunch of cash up front. And then we had to work it off. So I did not own all of that money. In fact, if I had absconded with it, I would have, been found guilty of stealing, right? So I knew that, and that was just the case. And I also knew kind of in the back of my mind, I wasn't paying that much attention, that it flowed through to my W-2. And then it's really, there's no reason to get into all that detail about what happens with it. But in any case, I got a divorce and I was the breadwinner. And so I ended up paying spousal support based on that cash basis W-2. Whereas if we had been on an accrual basis, which is when you recognize the revenue when you work it off, the business wasn't really even making any money at that time, and I would not have been liable for spousal support. Now, it's been many years, so I'm completely over it now. But at the time when it happened and when I realized it, after I made the agreement and everything, I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? So my experience share is make sure that you have people that are working with you, advisors and people to help you, because what I learned was a CPA simply has taken a test and passed it. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have good financial acumen.
Oh, yes. You definitely have to surround your people with good financial acumen,
Yes.
especially if you're like me, and it sounds like you as well, where your passion is elsewhere, right? You
Yes.
don't wake up and say, "Wow, I can't wait to look at my books today. I'm so
Right.
excited." Right?
Right.
So you need people who
Yeah.
can dot the I's, cross the T's, keep you focused on what's important, and
Yep.
alert you to landmines along the
I
way.
want to share one other thing that's more recent that I just learned about myself. And that is that, all of us have bias and blindness about different things. And I can get so attached to an outcome that I can miss something that is literally right in front of my face. And that can have grave consequences. In this case, it hasn't had any grave consequences. I was really glad that I became aware of this before it really did have grave consequences. But it was something that I'm a verbal processor, so I don't know what I think until I say it. And I was speaking to someone and I said something, I was like, oh my gosh, that is literally in front of my face and could have a very big impact on our business. So it's one of those where I was like, oh, okay, that's good. That's good to know that about myself, that like really open myself up to that bias and blindness and see what's the bigger picture? What am I not seeing because where I want it to go?
Okay. Well, whenever we're vulnerable, whenever we talk about mistakes, it feels a little bit heavy. So I'm going to lighten up the air a little bit, and we're going to do some rapid fire. A cool thing about Cincinnati that few people know.
Actually, it's a very affordable and livable city. The weather is not great, but it's a very affordable and livable city, and it has a really, really cool downtown.
Nice. I've heard nice things about it. I haven't been there yet. I've
Yeah.
been in Ohio. I've been in Kentucky, but I've never been in Cincinnati.
Oh, you were close.
I was close. I was close. A book that's impacted you profoundly.
Um, Eckhart Tolle, A Whole New Earth, has impacted me very profoundly. And the other one I cite an awful lot is Michael Singer's The Untethered Soul.
Hmm.
You can tell I have a bent towards personal development, self-awareness kind of things. And I just think those things, self-awareness cannot be overestimated in its importance in leadership and in life. So those two
Right.
books have deeply impacted that aspect of myself.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next one. A food you could eat every day.
Chocolate.
I could do the same for sure.
Yeah.
Your dream vacation spot.
Paris.
Nice. A go-to karaoke song.
Different Drum by Linda Ronstadt.
That one I don't know. Most used app on your phone.
Um, Probably my text messages.
Okay. A hobby you picked up recently. If you have to go back further, that's fine too.
Yeah, I'd have to say drawing, but I haven't been doing it recently.
Okay. Well, maybe you'll get back to it. Who
Maybe I
knows?
will.
Okay. Sweet or savory snacks.
Both.
A superpower you would love to have.
I would love to be able to sing like Celine Dion.
Hmm. Okay. I think many people would say the same. And
Mhm.
finally, a productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
Daily meditation.
Nice. For me, it's prayer, but I hear you loud and clear.
Mhm.
Okay, so before we wrap up, Christy, let everybody know, please, how they can get in touch with you, learn more about you, and benefit from all this experience and wisdom you've shared.
You can find me on LinkedIn, just Christy Pretzinger. You can also go to wgcontent.com. That is our company organization, and there's lots of information on there about me and everybody else and what we do. And like I said, the book comes out in January, so hopefully people will want to buy it.
Awesome, absolutely. All right, Christy, you've shared a lot. I'm going to be selfish and ask for one more. Please leave us with a final life lesson.
For leaders, I would say that your business is you and you are your business, and it won't grow until you do.
Succinct and very powerful. Thank you for that, and thank you for the conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. Learned a lot on many levels, and wish you much success with everything you do in your book in particular. Thank you, Christy, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.